Igor, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Joe. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Anytime, anytime. I think this will be a continuation of a very serendipitous chat we had. We were, for the audience out there, it was during Databricks Summit, and walking down the street, and I see a person walking next to me, and I turn to my right, and he turns to his left, and there's Igor. So
It was, I think the best part is you were just following me because I looked like I knew where I was going, but I was not going to the summit at the time.
that's also true. Yeah. But you did show me where to go, so thank you. I got to the right place. And then the funny thing is, I was doing a book signing at a booth, and right next to that booth was Big
Big
Eyes
Eye booth.
booth.
Yeah.
So yeah, you couldn't make this stuff up if you tried. So it's good to see you again.
Great seeing you too.
Yeah. For people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
For sure. I'm Egor Gryaznov. I am the co-founder and CTO here at Big Eye. I like to think of myself as a software engineer by training, but a data nerd at heart. I got into data very early in my career, back when Hadoop was write some Java classes and it's map and reduce, and you're going to process some flat files. And from there, data warehousing, ETL, analytics, BI, internal tooling. Before Big Eye, I was at Uber. I was one of the first data engineers there, stood up their original data warehouse stack, migrated everyone to it. But Uber was notorious for building things in-house. And that meant my team had to build everything in-house, and we didn't buy software. And I started Big Eye as a way to take a lot of what we built, make it better, because everyone has the same problems. And hopefully some people can avoid, let's just build something, and they can buy the tools and skip the boring stuff and get to the fun parts of data.
At Uber, did you build your own data warehouse from scratch?
We did not. That was we used to use Vertica.
Okay.
And the reason we used to use Vertica, but we did build our own transactional storage from scratch.
Really?
Yeah. If you're interested, look up Schemaless. There's a blog post on Schemaless. It is, in the most reductive form, Cassandra that is backed by a bunch of MySQL clusters.
Okay.
It was a way for us to get over the scale problem of trips and storing trips and lookups. Yeah. But a couple of years later, we actually had a Cassandra team, and then we had a Schemaless and a Cassandra team. It was an interesting time at Uber, but no custom warehouses. That said, Hoodie came out of Uber. That's the storage format. Now it's Vinod was the lead there. He has his own company now. I think they're called One House now.
One House. Yeah, I'm actually getting a talk with him in Bangalore 2 months from now.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah.
Dope.
Yeah. So that came out of Uber. A lot of data startups, Tecton. A lot of data startups came out of Uber because we built a lot of things in house.
Right. It's a feature and a bug.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think at you spoke at my meetup. I think it was last year or something like that. And I think you mentioned that there were like thousands of microservices there, like more than there were engineers, I think.
Yes, actually, that's a great point. At some point we did an audit of how many microservices were running at Uber. Well, let me take a step back. Originally, Uber was a giant monolith, and then obviously that didn't scale. So we had to scale both the storage layer as well as the API layer. So then everything turned into a microservice. But then we took it one step too far, where 2 years into that effort, we look back and we're saying, oh, okay, we have 1,000 engineers at the company and we have 1,200 microservices. This feels wrong. And I don't know if that got fixed. I don't know. I should have asked somebody.
I wonder if there's a metric like microservices per capita for an engineering team.
I like that. Yeah. I don't know if that's the right metric to drive up.
Probably not. But somebody's going to do that though. It's like the hold my beer moment. So it's like, well, I got more microservices than you do. It reminds me of the big data days when it was first starting, because I think people literally took big data at face value and like, well, how much data do you have at your company? Well, I have more. And So
I remember when people competed on how much data could you store. They're like, oh, we're building exabyte clusters, uh, and I'm like, great. What are you doing with that data?
mm-hmm.
What do you even do with that much data?
You're not going to try and query it repeatedly, I would hope,
I would
right?
hope not.
I mean, even I was talking with Jordan Tigani about this. He was a founding engineer of BigQuery, and he later the product manager over it too. So he ran some stats, and it was like, even if you had petabytes of data, like, you're probably not querying that. I think most people's queries were in the orders of like hundreds of megabytes.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of the reality of it. But yeah, exabytes. So it's interesting because it turned into a pissing contest, I think, for the longest time, where it's like, I got exabytes. How much do you have?
And this is really why, and like, data modeling exists. If we want to talk about data modeling, I would love to as well.
Let's talk about it. I like data modeling.
That's the whole reason of it. Like, all of those petabytes of data. I mean, let's even I spent 2.5 years at Uber doing A/B testing analytics. So experimentation. You log into the Uber app. You're in probably a couple hundred experiments simultaneously. Everything from how the app looks, what features are available to you, pricing models, so on and so forth, right? And the logging stream for that was the second largest stream in all of Uber. We were logging terabytes a day. We then our data pipelines would process that down to like 600 to 800 gigs a day of just the raw records that we actually need at the raw levels. And then we would aggregate all that down to about, I think, 10 gigs a day. And that was our pipeline. And then the 10 gigs a day aggregation was purely this user in this experiment saw this experience on this day and really in this time range. And to your point, nobody ever queried those raw logs, ever. Nobody touched them. And 90% of usage and our internal application all went through that 10 gig a day table, which was very, very, very manageable at that point. And partitioned well and or structured well, your query on experiments, sort your data on experiments, let the query optimizer do its thing. And so that's how we solve the scale problem, is you just keep aggregating down to what makes sense. But I think there feels like there's a little bit of a resistance now in the market of like, oh, let's like figure out the usage patterns, figure out what that looks like, and then keep boiling things down to only the usage patterns. It feels like with cheap storage, cheap compute, we're going all the way down the road of just store everything, query everything. It's cheap to spin up more clusters, cheap to spin up more compute, and storage at this point is negligibly cheap unless you're talking about petabytes of data.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we have made our lives too much easier here.
Mm-hmm. I guess when talking about data modeling, like, what were some of the did you have any formal data modeling techniques that you adopted at Uber, or walk me through that?
I'm not gonna open the the war of like which data modeling techniques are best. No. I am personally a fan of Kimball. We do Kimball's dimensional modeling. I have the data warehouse toolkit that I think shared with at least 5 or 6 people now, many of whom have said that it was the most influential thing that they've read. And my statement to them has been, read the first 3 chapters and then pick out the examples that you need from the later chapters. And that's the way I like to read the data warehouse toolkit. But things like type 2 and type 3 dimensions, or what we did, we had slowly changing dimensions at Uber, obviously users. So we stored a history table, and then we stored real-time view. And so depending on what kind of analysis you're doing, you're going to go to a different table. And what kind of aggregation you're doing, you're going to use the history table to see the actual state of the world at that time. And so concepts like that, concepts like actually separating out your facts and dimensions, not duplicating all your dimension information in every single record. Because going back to it, on the experimentation, if we started logging every single attribute of the experiment that we cared about, we would probably just bring down the whole infrastructure. And so we logged what we needed to. We logged 3 keys, and then we would look up all the attributes based off those keys. Because you can't log it, and I think that's a common pattern now, that it's easy to get started with. Just log everything in one giant message and then figure it out later.
Right.
But I think once you get to the point where that doesn't scale, you're going to run into big problems. And so thinking about the data model ahead of time is going to save you a year down the road.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, everyone knows I'm working on a new book on data modeling, so it's a topic that's near and dear to, but it's one of those things where I agree with your sentiment earlier, where there's a lot of holy wars when it comes to data modeling, and I don't know. I'm of the opinion, pick what works for you. I'm not going to tell you, and that'll evolve over time, right? It also depends where you are in the data life cycle too. When you're creating data, it's you got to be mindful of it.
Yeah, so. And I think part of it is your business best. Data modeling isn't a one size fits all. Right. Like no technique is a one size fits all technique, in the same way that no technology is a one size fits all technology. Figure out what your business looks like, how it operates, what are the key concepts in your business, and then use that to actually create a model that makes sense.
So, I mean, when you were an early data engineer at Uber, how did you go about figuring out the concepts that would be appropriate for a model?
So the first year of our team was dedicated to migrating everyone's queries into Vertica. So before the data warehouse team got started at Uber, it was a bunch of Postgres replicas. And Uber has had an internal sort of culture of figure it out yourself. Our data access tool, we didn't have we had some internal tooling for operations, obviously, but the biggest data tool internally was Query Builder, which was a bit in circa late 2014, a text editor with a drop-down menu that says which database are you querying, and then you write a query and you hit send. That's it. And then you get the data back. And those databases were Postgres replicas of the production database. And then at some point they were sharded across by region, which led to its own set of problems. How many users do we have? How do you know if the data is sharded?
Right.
That is the moving from that model where you have hundreds and at some point thousands of ops users, analysts, finance people, product people, engineers going directly to the raw replica, and then issuing these queries, migrating those queries to the warehouse, then trying to understand which queries are breaking the warehouse, what joins are we seeing all of the time, going and asking people, what are you doing? What does this query do? What does this mean? Why are you running this every day? Is there something like, what questions are you trying to answer? And then from there going to, okay, if these are the common questions, these are the common query patterns, these are the common things that people are doing with the data, let's start there and create models around the things that are the most common. So that hence the first 3 models that came out are fact trip, dim driver, and dim writer. The first 3 models, obviously. But dim driver used to be a 9 join query. People would literally just copy paste the from clause because they would keep it in a notebook because the raw data was fully normalized. And so they would just copy paste the from clause and then add whatever filters they want. But then that led to terrible performance across the board.
Oh, I can imagine the pandemonium from that. It's but you got to do what you're going to do, right? I mean, you got a job to do, and you do the best you can with the tools you got. So
and honestly, I have said this a lot of times. Uber was built by the ops team. The fact that they had Uber had an ops team that would just say, okay, I want to run a new campaign in my city. I'm going to go learn SQL. I'm going to go figure out how this works. I'm going to figure out what the data looks like. I'm going to figure out how to pull it. I'm going to figure out how to analyze it. But skill and the agility that the ops team had is phenomenal. One of the biggest reasons for the success.
That's cool. I know Uber's engineering and ops are legendary, legendary. Their blog is definitely one of the most easily one of the most popular engineering blogs in the universe. So that's really cool. I mean, so kind of after you did Uber and spun up the data warehouse, and you saw these really fun problems, you decided to do a startup. So like.
It's funny because I was looking for the same feeling that I had when I joined Uber. I joined Uber in 2014. It was a little bit under 2,000 people at the time. The engineering team was about 300-ish at the time, I think. And it felt great. It felt fast-paced. We were just like, it was just, here's the next problem. You're going to solve the problem. You're going to move on. And there's just a never-ending stream of problems because of the growth that the company was experiencing at the time. By the time that I left in 2018, it was a much more stable or 2019. I left in 2019. Yeah, it was a much more stable and mature environment. I felt like I was doing interesting work, but it wasn't. It was, let's go a little bit deeper. Let's make this a little bit better. Let's optimize that. That ETL pipeline that we had for experiment analytics, let's optimize that so we can run it a little bit faster. It uses a little bit less compute. And I just wasn't as interested in those kinds of problems. I like the 0 to 1 problem. I like the 0 to 10 problem. I mean, even the 10 to 20, 10 to 30 I can deal, but there was like a group of people that were just so much better at the 50 to 100 part of the problem that that was what the company turned into. And it makes sense. It's a mature company.
Yep.
They had their first profitable quarter last quarter, and I applaud them. Like they made it.
Hey, good job, guys.
They made it.
What was it, 14 years or something like that they've been around? But it's
And so that's why I started Big Eye. Like I still want to be in the data space. I just want to I'm much more interested in solving a lot of the 0 to 10 problems. And then also, when you work at an Uber, or I guess we don't call them FANG anymore. I don't know what the acronym now is. Ivory Tower Tech Company.
Well, I mean, I think they're called big tech, right? Big tech, but I mean, there's different degrees of big tech. Like, Google is obviously big tech, but I mean,
when you work at like Silicon Valley big tech, where it is. The culture is we're going to invent things because either one, we have problems nobody else has, or two, because we hire really smart engineers and really smart engineers want to build stuff. It's almost like a bubble. And then once you leave Silicon Valley big tech, you realize the rest of the industry isn't like this. When we were starting Big Eye, we interviewed people in our network. So these are people that worked either at Silicon Valley big tech or Silicon Valley startups, and a little bit of New York start. Like we had a couple of contacts in New York startup scene. And the reality is the sets of problems and the maturity level of the data teams there is so wildly different from the rest of the US enterprise landscape. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the biggest learning moment. And honestly, it's something that's exciting for me, because to me, that's a 0 to 10 problem. It's how do we help companies quickly get up to speed on the concepts and the things that matter and the things that are going to enable them to scale and grow efficiently.
Oh, it's at least a 0 to 10 problem. It's almost a minus 10 to 10 problem in some ways. So it's interesting too, because I mean, I know a lot of Bay Area founders, and I think overwhelmingly and there's a reason I don't live in the Bay Area. It's not because I don't like it. It's not because I haven't been recruited there a million times. It's because I don't want to be in the bubble, right? I kind of like where I am, just outside of it. But what I see overwhelmingly with especially new founders of new startups in the Bay Area is you're solving Bay Area type problems typically, right? Because that's what you know. And then you get out, the rest of the country, as you observed, is certainly not like that. It's, I call them dark matter companies.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're the 99% of companies you don't see, you never hear about them. They make a ton of money.
Yep.
You know, and they got, you know, in some cases good tech stacks, in some cases tech stacks that I would say are very mature and,
Mm-hmm.
you know, what they would call legacy. But as fun of also pointing out, legacy is a condescending term for things that make money. You know,
Yeah.
and so, you know, but it's a great opportunity.
Yeah.
But I think it's definitely the reality hit that a lot of startups get when they
Well,
leave the Bay Area and like, holy crap, they're not like us, are they?
yeah.
No.
No. I like to use. I've started using more traditional data stacks.
Oh, okay.
It feels like
Yeah,
a
I like
good
that.
balance. Legacy feels like this is legacy and should go away because it is no longer a
Right.
valid thing. But the Microsoft stack, the Oracle stack, SAP, still very, very valid technologies. We shouldn't like get rid of them. They serve a purpose and they serve that purpose well.
Yeah.
These are people who
I
have
like
worked on this for decades.
traditional, classic,
Classic data stack.
yeah, classic flavors,
Timeless.
timeless. But then there's a modern data stack, right? That's one of the things I think we wanted to talk about too. Is you know the notion of a non-modern data stack, right? And maybe we're
Yeah.
all kind of morphing the same terminology here. But what's a non-modern data stack, Igor?
That's really that whole traditional data stack, right?
Mhm.
I feel like I think this is going back to the bubble. You and I still live in a bubble. We live in the modern data stack bubble now. You might have escaped the Silicon Valley big tech bubble, but you have not escaped the Silicon big tech data thinking bubble.
Oh yeah,
And we live in this world where everything is all about modern data stack, where we're talking right, Snowflake DBT 5 right? The Looker, Tableau maybe on the other end, right? And there's your modern data stack, and that makes sense, except for the fact that most of the data in these organizations lives in the traditional data stack.
or in Excel.
Or even more terrifying, yes, in Excel. Yeah, v2 underscore final.
That's reality, though.
It is, and that's the interesting part to me. And we were talking about it right before this, and so I looked it up. The Snowflake Investor Day 2023 presentation. Snowflake loves to report on how many Fortune 2000 companies they have a contract with, because Fortune 2000 companies pay the most money to Snowflake, and so Snowflake wants that segment to grow. And they report an interesting number, which is in Q1 of fiscal 2021, they had 16% of the Fortune Global 2000 companies as a customer. So that was 2 years ago, right? I guess 3 years ago, their fiscal years are off. So 3 years ago, it was 16%. 3 years later, Q1 fiscal 2024, it is 30%. So they increased by 15%. They still got 70% to go. So if you multiply that out, if we're assuming a steady rate of adoption of Snowflake, and if we treat Snowflake as the, like leading indicator for modern data stack adoption, then we're really talking about, we're still 12 years out, 15 years out from 100% of Fortune Global 2000 companies have adopted Snowflake. And that's making a lot of assumptions.
A lot of assumptions.
And for those 15 years, something has to keep going. Data doesn't stop. Work doesn't stop. We don't stop. People aren't going to not do analytics and not do ML and not do reporting. They're just going to do it off of what exists today. And on top of that, every enterprise, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners are at large enterprises, every enterprise has every single flavor of database and ETL tool and BI tool known to man, guaranteed. And so just being a customer of Snowflake doesn't mean that all your data's in Snowflake, all your reporting use cases are out of Snowflake, all of your analytics are out of Snowflake. It just means it's another tool in the tool.
Oh yeah.
And so if we take those two things and combine them, we're over here I've seen debates about, is the modern data stack dead? Is the modern data stack alive? Is it growing? But it doesn't really matter because there's no, like, we're not transitioning into a modern data stack. We're adding tools into a toolkit that people may or may not use, but we're not getting rid of the old tools. No one's getting rid of their, like, oracles that they're deploying all their financial accounting software. No one's going to do actual, like, financial reporting out of Snowflake. They're going to keep it on Oracle and on their, like, TM1, and they're going to keep, like, doing the, like, real financial reporting that they need off of transactional databases that have people who have spent decades thinking about consistency and, like, durability and all of this. So in my mind, the non-modern data stack is really everything that we just don't think about because it's not interesting right now. But at the end of the day, that's where all the data is. That's where all the, like, 80%, 90% of the data probably lives there. 80 to 90% of use cases probably live in the non-modern data stack. And I'm happy that we're starting to sort of, as a data space, start to consolidate in terms of, like, what warehousing technology makes sense, what ETL technology makes sense, how transformations run. But that consolidation is, one, never going to be 100% complete, and two, I still think it's more than a decade out. So
yeah, I agree. It's I mean, so we work with a lot of I would say traditional companies, if you want to call them that, and traditional data stacks. That's the nature of the type of business that a company Ternary does. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I've never seen the quote modern data set come in and displace the traditional tools that are already there. If anything, it's especially when you get into bigger companies, Fortune 2000. You got to remember, like, these are big companies. They have different departments, and so you might see a Snowflake or a BigQuery getting adopted maybe by a department, but that doesn't mean it's universally used. In fact, I don't think most people in these companies are aware that the modern data stack even exists, especially when you get into departments that aren't quote data departments, right? They have their own tooling, they have their own workflows, and these may or may not be dependent upon the quote modern data stack. I see this almost universally. Again, the dark matter of data is Excel sheets, period. End of story. It's like that's it. So what I see often is executives are making decisions off of maybe, say, spreadsheets that have nothing to do with the data that's in the quote modern data stack, right? But in our bubble, of course, as you point out, we're often so fixated on, well, everyone's using Snowflake and DBT and Looker, and obviously this is a big thing. And and I think in our bubble too, there's I think some consternations that data teams are doing accounting in Snowflake with DBT, and I'm like, maybe some of them are, but I know for a fact, because my wife is an accountant, that she doesn't use DBT or any of that stuff for. She uses Excel like most people do, and whatever ERP system that you happen to be working out of.
I think this is another bubble assumption where our bubble is the modern data stack bubble, but by proxy, our bubble is smaller, more modern company, more recently founded companies that are effectively either startups or scale ups. I think I've heard that term recently. I learned it.
I don't know what the difference is, but yeah, I assume if you're a startup, you're hopefully scaling. Startup, but
I think the way that I understood it as startup is the 0 to 1, and the scale up is the 1 to 20. But who knows? I don't.
Who knows?
But there's our bubble is these more modern companies, but in reality, the vast majority of employers are these, like, larger enterprises, more traditional, more slow moving, that have a lot of regulatory responsibilities, a lot of compliance responsibilities, a lot of, honestly, just legacy things internally. I've started using the word organizational inertia a lot recently, where there is really just organizational inertia to bringing in new tools. This works for me. Why would I change it? And if what works for me is log into my GUI, dump out an Excel, a CSV, open it in Excel, drop a pivot table on top of it, and then send it out to my CFO, I'm going to keep doing that. Because for me to figure out how to do exactly this process with all the same assumptions and all the same business logic in another tool, it's just going to take me too much time. And I feel like all of us here in the modern data stack, like bubble, we aren't companies like that ourselves. So we don't think about companies like that ourselves. And so I think that's really the big leap.
Mm-hmm. It's true. And it's interesting too. I'm not sure if you've been involved in sales discussions when you try and talk to these non-modern data set companies, I guess. But our go-to-market typically would be, we partner with everybody, right? Mm-hmm. So that, the Snowflakes, the Googles, whoever. And the sales cycle is interesting because you really need salespeople who can communicate with the, with the people in these businesses, right? Mm-hmm. But in a lot of ways, it's a translation game.
Yep.
Because people simply don't care about, a lot of this stuff. And so as much as anything, I think it's an exercise in empathy and kind of meeting people where they are, which is, I think, one of the big challenges, because we're over here as an industry, as a data industry, talking about, whatever the hell we talk about these days. But it's out of sight, out of mind. Again, I talk to people like my wife, and she's like, "What do you guys do all day? Like,
Mm-hmm.
why is this important?" I think she asked me that once. I was like, I don't know. I mean, it just means you can get your data quicker, and better insights and data-driven, actions and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, it's true. I think out of sight, out of mind is the crux of the problem. That's mm-hmm. why there's bubbles. That's why everyone lives in their bubble, is because you just don't think about what's on the other outside of it, what's on the other side.
Was this something you had to realize too when you mentioned that you were in the Silicon Valley bubble, then you had to get out of it? Like, what was that dawning realization for you? Like,
it was about a year and a half ago, I'd say. I think is when at Big Eye we started off again selling to what you would consider modern data stack companies. We pretty much just said, all right, we need smaller organizations where procurement, to your point, sales cycles are going to be faster, less translation, less, more mutual context, right? And that worked out well for the first year. And then data observability, data quality is a problem universally.
Yep.
Nobody has good data. If you think you have perfect data, I would like to have a chat with you because I want to find out how you did that. And because it's such a universal problem, everybody is interested in it. Everyone from we have customers as small as like a 20 person startup that's doing things with data that's important and relevant to the business. So they're like, we need to make sure that the data arrives on time, looks the right way, so on and so forth. All the way through, we work with like Fortune 20 companies. And the interesting part is when we started talking to these larger organizations, and I like, let's call it Fortune 2000, but not even Fortune 2000. Like any organization with over 10,000 people in it is already going to have a lot of the same kind of behaviors and technologies that we're talking about. And that is when it sort of dawned on me that there's a whole nother world out there of not just from a technological perspective, where in my mind, technology is the easy part. A database is a database for the most part. I know I'm glossing over a whole lot here, but if it's a database that speaks SQL, I can reason about it, and that's fine. That works for me. But there's a lot of just organizational questions, the sorts of topics that come up of where in their data lifecycle these companies and organizations is oftentimes a different part of the lifecycle than we're used to dealing with in our bubble. And so data migrations, constant data migrations. We are on database X, we want to move to database Y. We are on reporting tool A, we want to move to reporting tool B. Everything is in a permanent state of migration. And you don't really think about that much in, again, going back to like Silicon Valley tech bubble. You don't think about that as much just because oftentimes there's a huge resistance to purchasing software or tooling or any sort. It's build it yourself. So migration doesn't exist. It's just let's build it internally, but V2 or extend it internally. Very rarely is it do we just purchase something to replace internally within Silicon Valley. And then the second thing for me is just the variety of problems that exist out there, at least from a data quality perspective, and really even not even just a data quality perspective, data management perspective, because quality is really just part of what people would consider like governance and like data, like all of these tools around managing your data, understanding where it is, what it looks like, how do you access it, who owns it. Silicon Valley tech doesn't think about this. We built a catalog at Uber. I think my co-founder Kyle was the PM on the project, and he led the catalog and quality initiatives there. But that was 2017, I think. I mean, data at Uber has been around for 3 years by then.
Yeah. Why did you build a catalog? What was the impetus for that?
We had, I think, 4,000 or 5,000 weekly active users of data at Uber, and the number of questions in our internal channels of like, hey, what's this? How do I use it? Where is this located? We're just like, nope, we're gonna have a search tool and we're gonna build a catalog. Or hey, is this data updated? Okay, great. We're just gonna build a catalog and put a little, yes, this was updated 5 hours ago. Go use it. And worked well at Uber because all the tools were like, it's all internal tooling, it's all interconnected. It's all easy to get this information around. But this is a problem that's been that these enterprise organizations have had for decades at this point. And they've thought about these problems for a long time, and because of that, they have very specific use cases. They're like, hey, I already have a pattern that works for me. We have data stewards, and we have data governance managers, and they're going to document all this information and make sure that everyone knows what the data looks like, where it is, what what business objects it represents, so on and so forth. And that's just like a different set of problems. Their problems is now, okay, how do we scale this out? How do we automate this? How do we plug into the tooling and the processes that we have today rather than creating and reinventing new ones? And I think this is why modern data stack adoption is so difficult at these organizations, because modern data stack comes in and says, forget what you knew about everything else. We're totally going to flip it on its head. And that's really, really hard to swallow. I think just for people in general is to like, okay, what do you mean I have to stop everything I've done for the last decade and do something completely different now?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a jarring thing. And I think a lot of people's job identities are also attached to how they've been doing things, right? So how would you feel if somebody comes in and tells you to change things up, right? So I've seen a lot of resistance to this from incumbent data teams, right? They'll fight tooth and nail to keep what they have, because that to them is job security, and what you're doing is you're a threat to that. I don't know how else to say it. So, that's...
Yeah. And this is where I'm a firm believer in, I think the only way modern data stack can be successful is if we start bridging the gap between modern and traditional technologies. We just have to. We can't treat these as two different like isolated systems and say, okay, well, there's all the traditional data stuff and then there's all the modern data stuff, and we're just never going to have like connect the dots at all. That just doesn't work. I mean, I love making the example, the correlation between software engineering and data engineering, right? What does observability in software engineering mean? What does service cataloging in software mean? It means you have a service map and awareness of everything in your whole deployment stack. I don't care if this is deployed as a a jar that runs on some random machine in the corner, or if this is a full-on Kubernetes application, doesn't matter. Cloud,
Right.
on-prem, the point of it is everything needs to be connected. Everything calls everything else around. There's interdependencies everywhere, and you need visibility across the whole thing. And you in software, you can't treat it as like, oh, this is my bubble, and I don't worry about anything else.
Right.
But it's almost like we're trying to do that with the modern data stack. We're trying to say this is the modern bubble, and then there's other stuff around it, but that doesn't really matter to us. And it's like that's not true. Like we're gonna have to bite the bullet on the fact that everything's connected, and we have to
Yeah.
be able to connect the dots.
I violently agree with you, and it's interesting because I feel like, especially you're in observability and data quality, right? And it's one of these things where we need to be aware of all the upstream sources of the problems. I mean, that's where data quality issues start, is when
Yep.
data is created. Because I feel like for a lot of data teams, by the time you're on the receiving end of whatever data you're getting, it's too late. The best you can do is duct tape over a problem, right? So yeah, it's music to my ears. I mean, obviously confirmation bias, but I've been thinking a lot about this. Definitely the shift left argument. I wrote a blog post about it last week. This the dev and data divide. And how it's caustic. But it's interesting because you talk to devs, and I did a talk last week in Salt Lake City with a bunch of software engineers, and I asked them, so when you talk to the data team, what are your interactions like? And one guy said, I ignore them. I ignore the requests.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care because like they're not clear on what they need, and I got a job to do, and it's not part of my sprint. So like, so
that's a whole nother shift left. I'm just talking about data stack shift left. If you're talking about like the data team versus the development team, that's a whole even.
Well, I mean, there's definitely data stack, but at the end of the day, people are running the data stacks, right?
Yep.
I mean, or the stacks. But yeah, I mean, there's
Yep.
definitely different shades of gray here.
From a data perspective, yes, people are running the data stacks. Data is stored in a database somewhere, gets replicated, used for by the data team. If we treat it purely as technology, we could probably solve that problem and deal with only one human stakeholder, which is the data team. As soon as you get to two human stakeholders, data team and developers, there's conflict of interest there.
Yeah.
Developers are, like you said, on a timeline. They have sprints to meet. They have cycles to hit. They have features to release. And they're not going to think about, they're just going to say, how do I get this data stored and displayed in my feature, and how quickly can I move on to the next thing?
Yep.
Whereas the data team is like, okay, how do I track changes, and is this used for reporting, and how does the business use this in combination with all this other data that we have? Just different priorities.
Yeah, different priorities. Yeah, but I don't know. It's an interesting one. I mean, but this is part of the maturity too, I would say, of sort of where we've been, as a data industry for the last at least decade, right? I kind of date the modern data stack as starting when Redshift started, but it's. I think for the last 10 years, we got really enamored by the awesome tools that were available, and I think it was definitely a great time where you could have cloud-based SaaS offerings in a very modular fashion and bolt them together, and it opened up a lot of possibilities. But your realization of the non-modern data stack, right, and traditional data stacks, I think is one I don't often hear, right? But I'm starting to hear this more and more, where people are starting to open their eyes to the bigger world out there.
Yeah.
So hopefully it's a discussion that continues in the industry. I mean, but kind of on a related note, I mean, Big Eye acquired a company recently that, when we were walking, you mentioned this had happened, and it was not an intuitive purchase for me.
That's so we acquired a company called Data Advantage Group, which I think part of the benefits here is now we own the domain dag.com, which I think is better than gold at this point. Really?
I'll go check this out.
Yeah, they have been in business for 2 decades now, and they have some outstanding technology around metadata collection and lineage inference. And the going back to the modern connecting the dots between the modern data stack and the traditional data stack, this is kind of our part of the take is nobody's really building technologies to connect those traditional data stacks. And honestly, there's just a lot of tooling out there that exists, that people use, that organizations use, and we need to be able to connect it, map it, parse it, create the lineage between the two worlds. And so my hope is that this allows us to then bridge that gap more quickly and get to a place where we can say, yes, we would love to do observability on anything that you have, whether that's modern or not modern. But while we're doing that, we can also help you connect the dots all the way back to where that's coming from. And this is we're talking about more like databases, like the whole SAP stack, Microsoft stack, right. Oracle stack, ETL tools, like actual ETL tools like Matillion and Data Stage and Power Center, and all the way through the BI tools. And the BI tools like people forgot exist, like Cognos and MicroStrategy. Right. Like we kind of like forget that these tools exist. Again,
they're still widely used.
Very widely used.
Yeah.
Very widely used. And that is, that's the acquisition. That's kind of where we get. And like, I mean, MicroStrategy is a public company, right? They're a $5 billion BI tool company. I mean, I'm sure they would not want me to call them a BI tool company.
They're a blockchain company. Yeah.
That's true. I forgot about that. Is blockchain still a thing?
It's still here. Yeah. It's no, that's interesting though. And Informatica, for example, right? That's revenue wise, that's almost as big as Snowflake, or at least had been for a long time. Yeah. I think they're private, but I remember meeting with Informatica, and they're telling me the R&D spend each year, and it's like, holy crap, that's more than most quote data companies make in a year, right? And SAP, I mean, they're a juggernaut. They're going to be around forever. I think in nuclear war, it's like SAP will still be around. It's like try and get rid of SAP.
Well, going back to it, SAP is really good at the business applications that they power.
Oh yeah,
because they've spent decades just thinking just about that, about ERP systems, about inventory management, all of this stuff. Like this is just what they think about, and they build technology to be the best at solving those business problems. SAP is not going anywhere. They're not going anywhere. One of our most interesting hooks when we talk to enterprise customers is we're like, hey, we can do data observability on SAP HANA, and they're like, oh, really? Prove it. And we're like, here you go. Like, connect to a HANA database, and we'll do it.
Whoa.
Now, like, is it going to have all of the features of all of the what we can do on Snowflake and BigQuery? No, because we obviously optimize for a lot of the cloud things specifically, but the concepts apply. Database is a database. Back to my point earlier, we can do observability. We can tell you when your table, when your data looks weird. We can tell you when you're starting to have nulls, when you're deviating, your min and maxes deviate. We can tell you that for your SAP data. And so now, with going back to the acquisition, the goal is then, okay, your SAP data is actually probably flowing through like some Matillion into a Snowflake or a BigQuery or maybe Databricks. I don't know, depending on where what you're using. And then that's flowing into a reporting tool somewhere, like a Tableau or a Power BI or a MicroStrategy. And okay, connect the dots all the way back. That's a whole chain, and that's the unbroken paper trail that we need to be able to look at. And if the paper trail starts at the cloud data warehouse and goes forward, you're missing out on two whole steps, which is in this imaginary pipeline half of the pipeline. But in other tools, that might be 80% of the pipeline is pre-cloud warehouses.
Oh yeah, easy. Yeah, and I always wanted. observability companies to focus on this. So kudos for having that realization, because it felt like when I look at a lot of the observability tools, of which there are no shortage of them in this day and age, right? But a lot of them were just focused on the modern data stack footprint,
Mm-hmm.
right? But because I don't know, I mean, I work in a lot of non-modern data stack type companies. It's like that's just not the reality of it, and so it would be hard to address root cause, for
Yeah.
example, and identify it, right? Which I think the whole point of observability is to ultimately, fix root causes of problems
Yep.
and be able to identify those, but they couldn't.
Do you know Charity Majors? She is the CEO of Honeycomb.
I know of her. I don't know her.
Yeah.
No.
So Honeycomb's a software observability company, and we had Charity come and talk to our engineering team. We had a book club. We read her book, and she said something that really resonated with me. Observability is the point of observability is answering questions, the ability to answer questions that just come up, having enough information to be able to answer any question you have. And to me, that means having information about the whole system. What's going on in the system? What's the state of the system at any point in time? How is in the data world, how is the data flowing? And then having that information and then being able to use it to answer whatever question someone wants. If someone wants to ask, hey, I'm looking at this report, which engineering team owns the all furthest upstream source, should be able to answer that, right? Is there anything wrong with my application with this table? Should be able to answer that. Mm-hmm. And to your point, yeah, that extends way beyond the cloud native data stack. And I think taking it full circle back, it's conflicting objectives and priorities. It is easy to build on top of the modern data stack. Mm-hmm. Snowflake has some really nice things. BigQuery has some really nice things that make it very, very easy for us to integrate. Unity Catalog, the whole Unity Catalog API from Databricks, makes it very, very easy to do some things that would have been very complicated,
right,
5 years ago. But that makes it easy for us as a software company to build software on top of those systems. But that's not where the business value is to our end users. So we're just going to have to do the thing that makes the most sense from a business value perspective, even if that means sacrificing a little bit of, okay, it's really easy to get query logs out of Snowflake, but really hard to do it for other systems. But that's why we build software, to make our users' lives easier, to automate things that would otherwise be really hard.
Yeah. That's really cool. I'm really excited for where things are going for you. It's a different direction that I've seen other companies in your space take. So that's super cool. Awesome. For people who want to learn more about you and what you're up to, how can they do that?
You can check us out at bigeye.com. We talked a lot about the acquisition. We got a little banner on top of our website, so you can read our take on that there. Also, if you want to talk data observability, traditional data stack, anything else that's on your mind, I am happy to just get an email or a LinkedIn message. Egor@bigeye.com, EGOR @bigeye.com, or find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. And also dag.com, I guess we can go there.
Dag.com. We'll go and start doing something with that domain.
That's awesome. That's quite the find, I got to tell you. So wasn't sure if that was on purpose or if that was a collateral, but yeah, congrats.
Total chance.
Okay.
Did not know that dag.com was taken. Didn't think about it. When I talked to them and I asked them what their website is and they said dag.com, I'm like, this is like light bulb. I'm just like, this is cool.
It was meant to be. So, yeah. Awesome, dude. All right. Great chatting. We'll talk to you soon, man.
Yeah. Talk to you later, Joe.
All right, take care.
Right.